Black woman. Beautiful, powerful, resilient female of African descent with skin kissed by the sun. Conversation. A talk, especially an informal one between two or more people in which news and ideas are exchanged. We love being Black women. Black women are ambitious. Black women are confident. Black women are diligent. We are tenacious. We walk out of our houses put together. We are many shades and personalities of fabulous. But we as Black women don't talk about our dilemmas, current events, and what's going on every day that affects us. So we created this podcast as a way to laugh together, cry together, and have an open conversation about life as Black women.
Oh, that's deep. Black Women Conversations.
Hey, Nicole.
Hey, Janine. How you doing?
Good. How's your week been?
You know how my week has been. It's been busy. Busy and dramaful. Let's be honest about the situation. I'm not going to tell the listeners all the drama I've been through. Some of the listeners that subscribe to the podcast are involved in all the drama that I've been through this week. So let's just say that. But it's been busy and it's been productive as well.
I am all for busy and productive, not so much for the drama, but I know you and I know that drama doesn't stop anything. This train is going to keep moving, whether the drama's here or not. So might as well get on board. So we did have another debate. It was a little more civilized, right? Wouldn't you say?
Was that?
I said a little. It wasn't the over talking. But I think that we're pretty clear as to what needs to happen.
Trump looked like he was a boy that had lost his bike. He was pouting during the debate. They were not muting the mic like they were supposed to mute the mic. Whoever was controlling the mute mic button needed to be fired because they were still talking over one another. And I was like, literally, for a moment, I turned the sound off just to watch the facial expressions. Yeah, he looked like he was throwing a fit.
He did. But, Vice President, soon to be President Joe Biden, I loved his facial expressions. It was almost like, I can't even believe this is happening. But the one thing that stuck with me was our president saying that he was the least racist person in the room.
He's been saying that.
I have no words. So we're going to move on.
So, Janine, what's on your timeline this week?
Okay, so I actually started hearing bubblings about this probably at the beginning of October. And I kind of assumed it was because October is National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. However, there are several stories that continue to surface. And I, just started paying a little bit closer attention to this. And when I started paying a little bit more attention, I realized that there was a trend that seems to be happening. And it's, to be very honest with you, it's outrageous. So all across the country, police and government organizations have been cutting ties or withdrawing access to domestic violence organizations that support the Black Lives Matter movement or any anti-racist support. It seems that this all began back in June when several coalitions against sexual assault and domestic violence signed a letter. In the letter, it talks about the consequences of making police and prison systems the solutions for violence. Instead, they point to investing in more community resources. Well, the Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence in Nebraska was contacted shortly after that by Sheriff's Association, and it basically requested that the coalition withdraw their name from this said letter. When they declined, stating that, they are an anti-oppression organization, no matter what kind of oppression or who the person being oppressed is, the sheriff's department said that they were then going to cut ties with their organization. Now, over in Idaho, not only did the Sheriff's Association cut ties, the Chief of Police Association, as well as the Prosecuting Attorneys Association, they all withdrew their support from the state's coalition against sexual and domestic violence because of this same letter. So I think that while those two are quite egregious, I think that the most egregious of them is a story that comes out of Wisconsin. So Embrace is a domestic violence shelter that has 4 locations in Wisconsin. Given the social unrest, Embrace decided to put small Black Lives Matter signs in the windows of all 4 of their locations. The executive director, Katie Bement, stated that the signs were more posted as an acknowledgement of accessibility to the African American community to let the people of color know that this was a safe and welcoming place. I personally think that it made sense, seeing as though only 6.38% of Wisconsin population is African American. 85.9% of the Wisconsin population is Caucasian. So given the social unrest, it seems like a logical sign to place in a window of what would appear to be a white establishment. So the signs were posted back in the summer. Katie stated that basically she was contacted numerous times by several law enforcement organizations asking her to remove the signs. And they stated that the reason why they were requesting the removal of the signs was because they felt like the signs stated that they were anti-law enforcement. Katie said that, she addressed it with them and said that it has nothing to do with law enforcement. Again, she stated that it was more about acknowledging accessibility for African Americans. So in September, Embrace released a statement publicly, and then they also posted it on Facebook. One of the things that they said, as an anti-violence organization, Embrace cannot end one form of violence without addressing the other. And we cannot properly serve all survivors if we do not acknowledge and address the oppression and violence the most marginalized survivors are experiencing. They go on to say, if you want to end intimate partner violence and sexual violence, we must grapple with the country's long history of racism, slavery, genocide, and colonization. And in the actual post, they say, we support, this is the Facebook post. This is separate from their statement. And I'll post this on our social media. On their Facebook post, they say, we support Black Lives Matter. And they hope that everyone would join in with them in breaking the cycle of trauma that's created by racism and violence. So that statement was released on September 30th. On October 7th, in a Barron County Executive Board Committee meeting, according to the meeting notes, which were obtained by reporter Rich Kramer from NPR Wisconsin, the executive board decided to stop the funding for the organization. So Embrace will lose the $25,000 of funding for 2021 from Barron County. So Barron County is just one of the counties that they serve. On October the 10th, the Washington County Sheriff's Department issued a press release stating that they, as well as other law enforcement agencies in the surrounding areas, have also ended their partnership with Embrace. According to CNN, 14 of the 17 law enforcement organizations that Embrace worked with have withdrawn their ties and partnerships with the organization. One single county, Rusk County, said that they have not changed their partnership and have no intentions of doing so, but that's one single county. Katie, the executive director, she says that, she's concerned, and rightfully so, because Embrace serves about 90,000 people. So essentially, she addresses that this bureaucratic backlash is basically over the Black Lives Matter movement. And as opposed to them being focused on helping the community that they're supposed to be serving, they're so concerned about it being, quote unquote, anti-law enforcement. So the biggest issue that Katie pointed out was Embrace has a partnership with these law enforcement agencies because they have a program that's called the Homicide Prevention Program, in which there's a short screening done when a 911 call is received that basically screens people to determine if they're at high risk for being a victim of homicide. So basically, once they've been screened, if they've been deemed a high risk victim of homicide, they are then turned over to Embrace, where they take on the victim and safely place them until they can, take the next steps to move forward to be removed from their domestic violence situation. She also stated that that's not the only program that's going to end. She said they also have a COVID-19 program because, of course, with COVID, people being stuck in the house with their abuser, cases have spiked. And I did a little bit of research, and according to Health Day, they said that in August, they saw X-ray evidence. It shows that the pandemic has almost doubled the domestic violence situations in the United States. So this embrace versus the police situation is a perfect example of not only systematic racism, but also the intersectionality between the various social issues that are being caused by just the state of our country and COVID too. But Nicole, honestly, I can't help but think of the irony of the last time when we heard about Wisconsin prominently in the news, and that was the Jacob Blake case. And as disturbing as that is, that case started as a domestic violence case. I just can't overlook the parallels between the two. And, you know, obviously, while it did turn into and was publicized because it was a police brutality situation, it was initially stemmed from a domestic violence situation. The police were called to the scene because of a quote unquote domestic disturbance. That's a case that could have been and or would have been handled by an organization like Embrace. And I think that Embrace and other organizations are obviously extremely necessary. But I think that the fact that civil service has seemed to have gone out of the window and taking care of and serving the community that you are hired to serve seems, or even elected to serve, seems to take a back seat to people's political feelings. So Embrace has actually set up a GoFundMe page to raise money so that they can continue to provide the necessary services. And I will post that on social media. While I know that these are not isolated situations, our country has a way of re-victimizing victims, and this seems to be a case of that.
Here's the thing, you know, when they're defunding programs that are put in place to help other people because of political interest and political gain, I am sick and tired of this administration politicizing everything, right? So COVID-19, all of a sudden, your health became a political issue. So if you're a Republican, you don't wear a mask. And if you're a Democrat, you wear a mask. That's stupid. So you want to die for your political beliefs? That's the craziest thing I've ever heard of. Domestic violence organization. How is that political? Even the Black Lives Matter movement. How is that political? All this organization is saying, and people that support it are saying, hey, these Black lives are getting gunned down and killed at a disparate rate, and not just gun violence, but health disparities in general. Black lives matter. And when we talk about the injustices and biases within the medical system, as well as within the community, we have to realize, like, the numbers don't lie. So this is not a political thing. Like, oh, you support Black Lives Matter, so you must be Democrat. So we're going to, as racist, we're going to defund you. No, I mean, it's not doing anything but causing more turmoil in the community. And I don't understand why these organizations are doing this. And now you have counties removing funding. Barron County only gave $25,000 to Embrace that serves 90,000 people. One, they should have been given more money, right? These people service a lot of people. $25,000 is not a lot of money. So them snatching their $25,000 is just a slap in the face. You should have been funding them more anyway. Hopefully they'll raise more money through this GoFundMe, which they probably will, than they did through this county funding. But the fact that they even have to set up a GoFundMe because they're a community organization that's helping people in the community that probably can't help themselves, that probably need a plan to get out, is just ridiculous.
And like I said, I will post the GoFundMe on our social media, because I just don't think, this is my personal belief, I don't think that funding should stand in the way of anybody's safety ever, under any circumstances. And I agree with you, Nicole. $25,000, it's a slap in the face, really. And I think that the bigger slap in the face is that you are willing to discontinue a program that helps save lives because you want to make a political statement.
Well, I know that domestic violence, it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And as you said, Janine, there has been an increase in people in general, particularly women, experiencing domestic violence episodes because they're cooped up in the house with somebody that may not have a job anymore, that's angry because of their financial situation. So because of that, the violence rates are going up. But today, because we don't know enough about this, we have brought a special guest on who is a near and dear friend to me named Alexis Young. Miss Alexis Young is a licensed clinical social worker with over 12 years of experience at the state and federal levels, serving children and families in the areas of clinical intervention, chronic illness issues, and program management for at-risk communities. In 2018, Alexis founded Therapeutic Wellness Solutions, LLC, a private counseling agency providing services for adolescents and adults focused on trauma, depression and anxiety, and women's health issues. The same year, she was appointed by Governor John Bel Edwards to the Louisiana Rehabilitation Council. She is the proud wife and mother of 3 beautiful children. Miss Young, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how are you guys today?
Hi, Alexis.
Hey, so I'm really glad that you all invited me on and the opportunity to talk about disparities that exist today. I'm always excited about it, specifically domestic violence awareness on a daily basis because I work with individuals on several different levels. So children, their families, specifically their mothers. I always talk a lot about the issues that come about with family violence, specifically domestic violence, right? So domestic violence is, we usually think about it in the framework of a woman, usually, even though men can be affected by domestic violence, we usually think about a woman being hit, physically by her intimate partner. Does it always have to be physical abuse? No, it can entail emotional abuse. It can entail physical isolation of a person. It can entail withholding of funds, right? So a woman feels like she has to stay in that situation because if not, she won't be able to care for her children. She won't have anywhere to stay. And so with that being said, it ensues a cycle of violence, right? The cycle of domestic violence. And what does that look like? So the cycle of domestic violence basically starts with that actual acute phase of the battering, right? And it doesn't mean that, when a person gets into a relationship with someone that it starts that way. Quite often it does not. Abusers usually present as very well put together. They seem like they would be great partners, but over time, they condition their partners to have lower self-esteem through degrading language, right? By slowly isolating them from their family and friends, not allowing them to work a job, right? Because they may have access to means to be able to get away from them or to have other sources of connection besides the abuser. And so all of these things lead to the victim being isolated and the perpetrator being able to more easily engage in that acute phase of physical battery, right? So after that phase, there is a honeymoon phase that occurs, right? The abuser often apologizes and says, well, this is not me. This is not something I would usually engage in. And so the victim usually will stay because they do feel sorry for and have strong feelings for the perpetrator of the violence. And so after the honeymoon phase, the last phase of domestic violence is the tension building, right? So ultimately, victims will state that they are in a constant feeling of walking on eggshells. They don't want to do anything to incite violence from the perpetrator, but ultimately they feel like they can't do anything right. And the phase starts again with another acute explosion. right? And so this happens over and over and over and over again. And, I think we can all think of at least one person that has experienced some sort of domestic violence, right? Whether it's a family member or a friend, a colleague, and somehow we became privy to the fact that they were in a situation that was domestically violent, right? Whether it was because they showed up with bruising, or whether it was because they were receiving all these phone calls and texts in the work environment that seemed to be odd or off-putting. But how do we address it, right? So the bigger issue is, how do we support our friends, our families, our family members, our colleagues that are dealing with domestic violence, especially right now because we're in a pandemic and a lot of people are isolated, right? So think about this. So individuals who were already in situations that were more isolated because of their perpetrator or their intimate partner, both the same person, right? They're even more isolated because of the pandemic. They may not be able to see family members because the family members that they would automatically go to their home as in a safety, in a time of or need of safety, they can't access them as readily because they don't want to be exposed to COVID, or they don't want to expose them to COVID, right? A lot of domestic violence shelters are really limited with the amount of people that they can take in now, right? It looks different how the algorithm works. When someone calls, right, in to report that they are being domestically abused, the police may respond, and versus them saying that these are the avenues that you can take so that you can get out of the situation and be in a shelter, they'll ask, can you go to someone's home? And that person may or may not feel comfortable going to someone's home, right? Being that if they were to go, the abuser may know that person, right? And they don't have the shelter to as an avenue now because of the pandemic. So yes, we've seen several spikes across the country in reports of domestic violence and less access to means. Kind of going back to what Janine was saying, it's really sad to hear, but it's happening all over the country. The defunding of all of these nonprofit agencies who depend on federal dollars to be in existence, and they're having dollars pulled just for standing up for individuals' rights. That's a short intro, or long.
So what kind of services do you offer women that may be in these types of situations? Do you deal with these women at your agency? What do you do for them?
So on my end, since I am a therapist, I am at the end of what we would call the process of after the cycle of domestic violence, right? The end goal would be for you to see a therapist. So there's a couple of things that I would like to address before I talk about my role with victims of domestic violence. And the first thing would be that we want for victims to first be able to acknowledge that they are in an abusive situation, right? And so how do you do that? We ask that victims sort of journal what it is that they are encountering so that they can be more aware of patterns of behavior in their intimate partner who is abusing them. And then second, devising a safety plan, right? So what does that safety plan look like? The safety plan may look very different than it did pre-pandemic. But what it would look like is putting in place an order of protection. So that if that abuser does come to your safe place, you have something tangible that says you cannot be within a certain amount of proximity of me. And then the third thing would be, right, is to then get yourself set up with a therapist. Anywhere along those lines, you can get set up with a therapist, but we want to make sure that the victim is safe, right? First and foremost, because if the victim is not able to have their basic needs met, right? We're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? The basic level of needs being met. So shelter, food, water, feeling safe. If we don't have those things, then the brain is not going to be able to process the healing, right? We can't even start the healing process without first having a safe place. So whether that safe place is with a family member, or with in a shelter, we have to first establish that so that victim can feel comfortable and confident entering into a therapeutic environment and relationship. And so when my role begins as a therapist, really starting with the process of healing begins with talking with the individual about their own experiences with violence in childhood. Because if something that we don't always think about is that abuse is something that is not, it doesn't just happen, it's usually learned. Right? So perpetrators of violence historically been victims of violence, right? Whether it is sexual violence or physical violence or emotional violence or abuse, they have been victims themselves. Perpetrators have, as well as victims. So if you talk to a victim about their experiences in childhood, they have been abused by a family member, right? They've been abused by a partner in high school, or they always had feelings of low self-worth and low self-esteem. And so they often feel that they are not deserving of a loving and caring situation because they have never been in that type of environment, right? So the cycle continues into adulthood. So the therapeutic role really entails helping that victim to see themselves outside of the domestically violent situations. So that's where my role lies. And as a social worker, it's great that I'll, be able to help them not only therapeutically, right? So clinically, but with resource mobilization. So I do pride myself on being able to help individuals with the resource implementation. So because individuals that are experiencing domestically hostile situations have been isolated for so long, they may not be able to adequately connect the dots, right? As to if you give them a number, it's like, okay, I have the number, but I'm having a difficult time with working through where is a safe place even for me to call and arrange this, or I don't have transportation to be able to get the protection order. These things are, we sometimes take those things for granted, but a person who has been mentally manipulated for several months or even years, their capacity to do very small tasks has been diminished. And so that also is entailed in my role as a therapist.
So, Alexis, usually in this portion of the show, we go through letters that our listeners have written in, or scenarios that have been emailed to us, and we talk through a solution to these scenarios. So there's a woman, let's call her Misty, okay, for the purposes of this story, who shared a story with us. And she says, I was in college when I met John at a party and was instantly smitten. John was tall, he was muscular, and knew exactly what to say. We quickly moved into a relationship. There were a few women here and there that he flirted with, but he said that they meant nothing. They would call the house a time or two, but he always assured me that they meant nothing to him and that I was his number one. 10 months later, I was pregnant with our first child. I was nervous but happy. He was too. I remember his cell phone ringing one night. I was 27 weeks pregnant, and I picked the phone up because it kept ringing. It was a woman on the other end questioning who I was. When he heard me on the phone, he slapped me so hard, I must have blacked out for a few seconds, maybe a couple of minutes, actually. I woke up with him apologizing, holding my hand. I thought about it. I didn't want to be a single mom. I hadn't finished college yet, and I didn't want to tell my parents. So I forgave him. Now I have 2 kids by him. He works in construction, making decent money. I work as a paralegal, but it isn't enough to support me and the kids. He gets mad about once every 2 to 3 weeks and beats me. It's tolerable, but I'm tired. What should I do?
Okay, so first, I just want to, all those themes that we were just talking about were present in that letter. And so I definitely feel lots of empathy, because when you're thinking about leaving a situation, often you reflect back on how things were when you first met this person, and the possibility for things to get back to the way that they were. And so it's very important to focus on the present and focus on the safety of yourself and your children, right? So first of all, it sounds like she's pretty accurate about how often she's getting physically abused. And that's every 2 weeks. The first thing I would suggest and encourage would be for her to reach out to some sort of family support or friend support to try to begin to secure a safe place to go. If she's not comfortable with that, if she's not comfortable with disclosing her situation, she doesn't want any sort of retaliation from friends or family on her partner, or from her partner on her, if he finds out that she has been talking about their situation. There is the domestic violence hotline that she can contact, and she can actually go through all of the steps, all the way through getting a protective order, right? Devising a safety plan. She will be able to talk with an advocate, all from home, through her phone, right? And so when you Google the domestic violence, National Domestic Violence Hotline, it only shows up as the hotline. So it doesn't alert others to the fact that you are looking up information about domestic violence, right? So it's a very user-friendly website, but also a site that won't set off bells and whistles that you are attempting to get to a safe place. So I want to share this number with listeners. I know that some people's preference is to use their cell phone for maneuvering through situations, like so using websites. But if you do prefer to call and would like to talk with someone and have them to assist you with going through the steps, the number is 1-800-787-3224. And so that is a site that is that you can receive assistance 24/7, and you can get all of the assistance that you need no matter where you are in the country. And so those are the starting points that I would suggest.
Alexis, thank you for giving all of that information. And one of the things that you mentioned, but I want to reiterate, is that you can chat live on the domestic violence site. So
yes,
you can literally, there's a small button in the corner where you can chat with someone. So if you are not able to talk on the phone and you are, you might be quarantined with your abuser, you can chat. And as Alexis said, it does show up as the hotline. So it doesn't necessarily set off bells and whistles so that they don't know what you're doing. So to Misty, it's difficult for me because I've been in this situation before, and I just pray that she finds the strength to realize that it's not tolerable. In the letter, the one thing that stuck out to me is she said it's tolerable, which means that she's at the place that I remember so vividly, trying to make an excuse for why it's okay. And I really didn't think I was going to get emotional because I've talked about this, been through therapy for this, it's not something that I thought that I would still get emotional about, but I am. And I think that I'm getting emotional because I so vividly remember being at this place. And it's a place where no matter what anyone says to you, no matter how logical your escape plan may be, and no matter how smart you may be, because I remember when I was in the situation, I kept telling myself, like, you're smarter than this. You can't seem to find a way to justify your leaving. I just pray that she gets to the point where she no longer wants to tolerate it, because she doesn't have to. There are steps. There are, as Alexis stated, there are ways to get past this, but it's just, I feel for her. And I feel for her because you wake up and you find yourself in these situations and you don't really know where to go or how to get out. And something one day clicks and you tell yourself it's not worth tolerating anymore. And you tell yourself you are worth more than this. And I think it's important for me, and I'll share, how I was able to start to acknowledge that I needed to get past this, was just changing something about your internal dialogue, just one piece of your internal dialogue, and maybe not be so hard on yourself for being in the situation or allow other people's narrative to be absorbed into your internal dialogue. It's hard. Acknowledge the little progress that you make. Acknowledge speaking up for yourself. Acknowledge that you are smart, that you are better than this, that you do deserve more. And the more that you continue to tell yourself that, the more that you believe it. And the more that you believe it, the more that you are able to take action, and that you may be able to talk to someone else about it. And then the more that you talk about it, the more power that you feel, the more that you realize that you have a support system and there are people out there that would like to help you, and the more likely you are to survive it. As I said, I pray for Misty that she finds the strength and the will and the resources to no longer tolerate this.
So, I'm going to break this down, right? Because I'm going back through reading the story and I'm hearing our expert give us, this excellent advice about the steps she needs to take. And I'm hearing you talk about your personal experiences. And the thing that stands out is that when we have a relationship, if you think back to any relationship you've had, whether it's abusive or not, when you got out, you look back on it and you realize the moment the relationship went from sugar to ish, right? And she realizes the moment her relationship went from sugar to ish, right? And that moment, she tells us, she remembers she was 27 weeks pregnant. This man all of a sudden slapped the mess out of her. And she was like, oh my God, I cannot believe that I was slapped. But she felt like she was stuck, right? And even reading it, I was like, dang it, she's pregnant. If she wasn't pregnant, this would probably be easier for her to get out. She would probably bounce back to college and she'd be fine, right? There's always a scenario or a what if in somebody's past that they thought, well, if this wasn't the case, then I could do this. Well, realistically, it's just as hard as if you don't have kids versus with kids. Kids do complicate the situation, but it's hard regardless. But reading it, I was like, I bet she felt stuck there, right? I bet she felt stuck. But I want to tell the listeners, recognize the signs of when you feel like your relationship hit ish, okay? And then when you hit shit part, hit pause. Okay. And really think about, is this going to get better or is this going to get worse? Right. And because usually if you're in a relationship that's abusive, it's never going to get better. It's always going to get worse. So if you're in an abusive relationship and you hit pause, really have to come to Jesus with yourself and tell yourself it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse, and try to get out then. Because now, like, Misty is in a situation where she went ahead and stayed with them. And now she has 2 kids. And we don't know how this progressed. We don't know how long he's been abusing her for 2 weeks at a time. We don't know if it's been through both children he's been abusing her every 2 weeks, or now it's progressively increased to every 2 weeks. Perhaps then it was like, that was the only time he hit me. So I stayed with him. I thought he had changed. And now I'm pregnant with the other child and he started hitting me again. We do know that pregnancy is a very, very common time for women to experience domestic abuse. Most women experience domestic abuse for the first time during pregnancy. So it could have been that between those times, he didn't abuse her. But realize that it always gets worse. An abuser will not all of a sudden wake up in the morning and change. And the other piece, especially with Janine mentioning it, is know that you deserve better. But just like this man brainwashed her basically into thinking that she wasn't good enough to get off. She wasn't brave enough to start over. She wasn't strong enough to be a single parent. She can't go to her parents. You have to realize it's not going to be something that snap your fingers and then all of a sudden it's done, right? And so in addition to changing that one little thing that Janine talked about, really change your surroundings, right? Because you have to sort of try to reprogram yourself. So that may mean that if you don't have people that are trustworthy around you, you need to find some other people around you. Put other people around you that are positive. If you're on social media and you're seeing a whole bunch of trash, start deleting those people and start following inspirational things that can uplift you and program you to realize that you are more than enough for any man and that it's you that makes yourself happy, not some other man, and that you're strong enough to overcome anything.
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
So, first of all, oh my goodness, Janine, thank you so much for sharing your story, your personal story, because something that you said reminded me of why it is so difficult, right? One of the reasons that it's so difficult for victims to leave domestically violent situations, and that is the trauma that happens during the domestically violent situation, right? The event, the preceding events, and the subsequent events. So like all of those situations lead to compacted trauma, right? So I heard you saying that it was so difficult for you to listen to that letter even, and you found yourself becoming emotional because trauma is really held within our body, right? It's held within us. And so unless we do the things that you were talking specifically about, like challenging some of those negative thoughts, some of that self-talk that we're engaging in, and become more introspective, we continuously relive the trauma that happens to us, right? And it happens for everyone. It happens for everyone. You reflect on that past event and it happens again, and you think that you don't have the power to leave the situation. Right. And so it feels real to you. It feels like you're in that situation. So that's something that we do work through in the therapeutic process is how can you actively change those beliefs about yourself, right? Those core beliefs that have been present for so long and that become ignited when you are triggered by listening to a letter, listening to a similar story, when you are reliving similar events, right? You can feel like it's a cycle that I can't get out of, but it's true that changing those small things will change your patterns of thought, right? Just like we have cycles of violence, our patterns of thoughts and patterns of behaviors will either result in a different outcome or the same outcome. So it was very, very important, very, very important and inspirational. It ignited that thought in me and the things that we talk about in therapy, right? How can I change, right? It truly is in the person. It's never the victim's fault, but really encouraging them to see that I have some power. Because violence, domestic violence specifically, is about an imbalance of power. So perpetrators are always at any given turn trying to make sure that they are in power, always, right? And something that you said, Nicole, was really, a light bulb went off in my head, right? So the term is gaslighting, when a perpetrator is making you question reality. And that's what happens with the perpetrator and victim relationship. It's like you know you're in college, you know you're capable, or at least you used to know. It's like now I don't know who I am. And when you talk to victims, that's the case. That's why individuals, it doesn't matter what walk of life you're from. It really doesn't matter, because once you are brainwashed, you are questioning whether that is real, whether the capabilities, the capacity that you previously had, if it's still there.
Alexis, I am glad that you brought up gaslighting, and I'm going to be very clear. I did not plan on sharing my story at all today because, like I said, I felt I'm past it. And
Right.
While I do share my story in much smaller groups, just because I feel like God wouldn't allow me to go through something like that, not for me not to then help someone else through it. I don't generally share it publicly just because it's not really something that I'd like to talk about, as you can imagine. So
Absolutely.
Having said that, I'm glad that you brought up gaslighting, because a very big part of my story was gaslighting. And it was the constant turmoil between, as you said, what reality actually was and what I was being told and groomed, as I should say, to believe. It's very interesting because I think at the height of my situation, I remember getting up and going to work every single day. And at the time, I was fairly new. I think I had been on my job for maybe 2 or 3 months. And I wasn't making any money, but I was working in my field and I was super passionate about it. And I remember the narrative was that my job wasn't anything. Basically, my job wasn't dish and I wasn't making any money. And I don't know why you're doing this and you're never going to be anything. But I was letting someone who was sitting on my sofa unemployed tell me how useless I was and how my job wasn't fish. And to be very honest with you, it happened for a year. I was paying the bills. It was my place. He didn't even live with me, but it was like essentially between jumping from friend's place to friend's place, my place was a place to stay. So I wasn't even sure that he was faithful. I wasn't even sure of the status of our relationship. He didn't have a job. And I was working, busting my tail, doing what I wanted to do, what I went to school for, had student loans for. And I was letting this person tell me that I wasn't shit. And I really genuinely internalized that. Well, initially I thought, I don't really believe this. But when someone continues to tell you something over and over and over again, you have no choice really but to believe it. It just becomes ingrained in your head. And you start to have that negative thought process. And I really, now I look back, I'm like, how did I allow someone, and of course, hindsight is 2020, right? How did I allow someone that had nothing to offer, not a degree, not a pot to piss in, tell me what my self-worth should have been? I mean, it sounds crazy now that I think about it, but then it had such a stronghold on me that I can't even take that out of my mind. I mean, it seems like it was just yesterday.
Right. But look at you now, flourishing in things, in things, fabulous.
Absolutely.
You are.
Thank you, hype girl.
But again, that's why it's really important when you say it's ingrained in your head over and over again. Mm-hmm. That's why it's really important to recondition your brain and make sure that you're feeding yourself positivity constantly so that you can realize that, hey, this dude ain't and he is not providing for me. I'm doing it for myself. And he is not helping me achieve my goals. I'm achieving them myself. That's why it's really, really important to make sure that your circle is on board with the positivity. And people know, I will unfriend somebody from social media that has some foolery on their page real quick. I will not talk to you because if you are not feeding positivity, and I'm not talking about honest criticism because you need that in your life. But if you're talking down and you're talking about problems more than you are talking about solutions, I can't fool with you. I just can't bring myself in making my circle toxic. So it's important to make sure that the people in your circle are not toxic. That will help you retrain your brain so you can get out of situations like that. All right, Janine.
I feel like we've had enough of me, but Yeah. Okay. So I don't even really know how to bring this story up. Or how to explain this story. So I'm going to read you the details of the story from the Patch Cleveland. It's a news article. A 28-year-old man has been accused of attempted murder after shooting at a car full of people in Cleveland Heights on Sunday. According to the police, Sarah faces charges of attempted murder. On October 4th, 3 people went to visit the residence at an apartment building, and when the 3 arrived at the resident was fighting with her boyfriend. So according to the police chief, when the boyfriend began physically assaulting the resident, one of the visitors fired a gun into the air to break up the fight. The 3 visitors, they were getting in their car, and as they were getting in their car, the boyfriend of the resident went and got his gun and began shooting at the car. One of the visitors was hit in the leg. The boyfriend was later identified, and he was taken into custody Tuesday morning, which was 2 days after the incident. All of the information that I just read is from the Patch Cleveland. The victims in this story, both the resident, 2 of the 3 people in the car, are my cousins. And this is coming from my other family members. So my cousin, who was the resident at this apartment complex, and her boyfriend have had an abusive relationship for some years now. The person that was hit in the leg is my cousin and the domestic violence victim's older sister. She's now walking with a walker. According to the doctors and the news articles, it's saying that she's expected to make a full recovery. But I think that what's more disheartening is that the sisterly bond, it seems to be severed. So my cousin, the one that was shot, says that she no longer has a sister. Well, as we know, things like this break up families. But I can't say that I blame her, because the part that the news article does not state is this is not the first time that firearms have been involved in their domestic disturbances. So this is a pattern. And now the domestic violence is not isolated to his girlfriend. I mean, now it's expanded to other members of our family. The reason why he was not caught until 2 days later, well, he wasn't even caught. He ended up turning himself in because they couldn't find him. He is now in police custody, but it appears that my cousin is going to stay with him. I have a couple of questions. One, how do you mend family relationships after a situation like this? And 2, how do we make a safe environment for her to not only escape, but not put our family or herself in harm's way like this in the future?
So before Alexis gives her professional advice, I'm going to give my 2 cents. 1, I know that's your cousin, but somebody needs to go and shake her, because I will personally probably accept a certain level of disrespect. But once you involve my sister, the bets are off. I will kill somebody for my sister. So the fact that she is allowing herself to be abused is one thing, but now you're allowing your family to be abused. What if he had killed her sister? When you involve other family members and things like that, that's a very dangerous situation. And if this is a pattern, and we've used firearms before, luckily, no one has been killed in those situations, because when you involve weapons, now it gets really, really dangerous. You didn't mention anything about children. I hope that children are not involved, because they can be innocent bystanders in this. We hear about this all the time, where the pregnant woman gets shot and now the baby is dead, or, oh, this child was sitting on the sofa and now that child is dead. Like we have to realize that other people's lives can be in danger, and domestic violence doesn't just affect that one person. If that person is, fleeing and that the family doesn't know about it, this person comes and shoots up a house, or, shoots into a car like that happened in your situation, that can be extremely dangerous and extremely deadly to the whole entire family. Who was the singer? Is it Jennifer Hudson's?
It was her mom and her brother and her nephew.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They got killed. That's a whole family, 3 generations of people taken out by one person. And so, Janine, I hate that it's happening in your family. And it not only affects those that are involved, it affects everybody, right? It affects you and everybody that's even related to that family, because now you have to deal with the turmoil of, what could I have done and what can I do to help this situation? It's, stressing everybody in the family out. So it plays a role in every single person that knew these people, and it dismantles everybody's life. So I hate that your family is in this situation. I hate that you're dealing with this. I thank you for sharing your story and this publicly and talking about it. The only little silver lining that I see in this is that he's been arrested, right? And so hopefully he will spend some time in jail. And out of sight is usually out of mind. And in that time, hopefully she will find somebody amazing like Alexis that can help her and counsel her through this situation, so that if and when he gets out of jail, she is already moved on. She's already moved away from it, and she's already taken steps to forgive herself for allowing this to happen to her family, and forgive herself for staying in the situation so long, and to have the strength to move on and know that she is worth more than this person.
So I'm trying to figure out where to start with this, because it's so loaded. First of all, Janine, like positivity, light, and prayers to you and your family, because this is heavy stuff that definitely has the ability to cause the great divide between family members, right? I understand, and understandably so. To speak to the first part of the question, how do you go about mending family relationships when domestically violent situations get to the point where it's not only affecting the intimate partner, but it's also affecting other family members who are trying to support their, sister, brother, cousin, aunt, mom, whoever is involved in that situation? Really, it's important to back up and think about how much the brain has been affected by all of the emotional manipulation, right, and brainwashing, and to understand that the person that is your family member is not necessarily the person that they were before this relationship. And so in thinking about how you can best help them and mending the relationship, can you do this, or do you need to reach out to the professionals? And I'm going to err on the latter and say, need to reach out to the professionals and allow them to assist you with supporting and helping your family member earlier on than we usually do in the Black community. And that's why I said it's so loaded, because in the Black community, because of our rift with, police officers and law enforcement, period, we're less apt to reach out because we might lose our lives just by reaching out, right? So, different story. I digress, but it is all, really interconnected. If you don't feel comfortable calling law enforcement, calling or contacting an agency like the National Domestic Violence Abuse Hotline, right? So that you can have an advocate to actually help you through the processes as how to best help your family member. Because as you said, this was not the first time that this happened. It's not the first time that firearms were involved, right? So at what point do we say, I'm going to have to set the boundary before something like this happens, right? So that I can maintain the relationship that I have with my sister. That becomes our responsibility as supportive family members and friends of the victim. It's really heavy, because that's also a part of the therapeutic process, is setting healthy boundaries, right? Because as women, we have to learn that it is okay for us to set boundaries in intimate partner relationships. Period. It is okay for you to say, this is good for me. This is not good for me. Because we're not always conditioned or taught to do that, we start to take on more and more and more as acceptable. And we find ourselves in compromising situations. And so not only for, the family members to set boundaries, but the educational component of, teaching girls, young women, to set boundaries before they enter into intimate partner relationships so that they can be more aware of how to stay in a healthy intimate partner relationship versus an unhealthy one, right? So setting those boundaries on the front end, in which that's a little bit different than the question that was asked. But yes, definitely it's a challenge, but in order to keep the relationship, think about this. So if it were that your cousin, talking about not the victim, but her sister, had said, you know what, girl, I really, I want to be able to help you, but I think I'm going to have to do something a little bit different this time, and actually, reached out to, say, an agency like the one that you were referencing earlier on, that unfortunately, they're going through funding issues, but said, my sister needs help, then she could have kept that alliance with her sister, right? And that could continue to be a support for her, versus now there being a rift between them, which is, it's rightfully so now, that there's a rift because her safety was she was placed in harm's way.
Yeah, it's just such a difficult situation because it seems so logical. But like, we've discussed, they're both sides. Like, while it seems logical to those of us that are not in the situation, it doesn't seem as logical when you have had such mental manipulation and you are the person that's being abused. I mean, in my mind, I would think that, I would say, like Nicole, like, it's one thing if it's me, right? It's something completely different when it's my family. And I can't imagine what my cousin must feel like that this even happened to her sister. I mean, it's just devastating, but it goes to show these situations, they escalate, right? And they end usually, hopefully, in escape, but sometimes not always. And I think that it's something to be said for what Nicole said earlier of, thank God that no one was killed, but that's what happens when firearms get involved, right? Like, it could have been another way. And like I said, I just pray that the situation is that my cousin finds the strength to leave before anyone gets further harmed or, God forbid, loses their life.
Janine, you ready to move on to something new?
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so in doing research for this episode, I wanted to give some statistics, and there are a number of them, and I will post these statistics that I actually got from the domestic violence hotline website. So I'll post a few of them, but there are a couple that stood out to me. So the first one is 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men, which we did not talk about men, but men are also survivors of domestic violence. So 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men over the age of 18 have been victims of severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime, or will be, which is sad. I mean, 1 in 4 and 1 in 7, you add one more of us and one of us would be or have been survivors of domestic violence. And the other statistic that stood out to me, specifically in light of the story that I shared, is the presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide for a woman by 500%. More than half of women killed by gun violence are killed by family members or an intimate partner. And
Wow.
For those, I'm going to just repeat for those who might have missed it earlier. The National Domestic Violence Hotline number is 1-800-799-SAFE, and that's 799-7233.
Alexis, what have you learned new this week?
Okay, so this week, I was surprised to find that the term gaslighting that we were referring to specifically to domestic violence situations is something that is used also in larger entities. So like in dictatorships or cults, if you kind of think about the climate that we've experienced for the past 4 years, and people being completely out of sync with what reality is, we could say that has to do with being gaslighted. So hadn't ever thought about it in that light, but yes, so gaslighting can be used in several different situations, not just domestic violence situations.
Nicole, what did you learn new today?
Well, I have been reading about domestic violence this week because of the topic and because of the awareness of this month. And I learned a lot about transgender Black women. So a lot of transgender women have experienced sexual assault in their lifetime, but Black transgender women have experienced it at a higher rate. 53% were sexually assaulted at some part in their life, and 58% of transgender people in general who interacted with police reported being assaulted. Of that, 64% reported being sexually assaulted by the police. Isn't that crazy? And that's from transequality.org. Domestic violence rates are actually not reported much in the transgender community, but is predicted to be twice as high as it is in the cisgender community.
I mean, those numbers give me chills. 53%,
right.
That's over half.
Wow.
And then to be assaulted by the people that are supposed to be protecting you, that is absolutely disgusting.
Motivational moment?
Yes, ma'am. We need some motivation after this one.
Our motivational moment, stop telling yourself you can fix him. He's been this way for a long time and he doesn't intend to change. Save yourself instead, make a plan, and get out while there's still time. Until we meet again,
pray, work, slay.
And show off your melanated excellence. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, That's Deep, Black Women Conversations is produced by Nicole Lee Plenty and Janine Brunson Johnson. Executive producer, Ken Johnson. Get the Oh, That's Deep Black Women Conversation podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or where you get your podcasts. Please subscribe and rate us. You can follow Oh, That's Deep Black Women Conversations on IG at Oh, That's Deep BWC. Oh, That's Deep Black Women Conversations is a Mean Old Lion Media production.